record on this computer. Okay, a couple things. So class starts at 7:45. We've got a lot of content to cover in the remainder of the semester. It's really imperative we get here at 7:45 and get going right then and there and not trickling in. The other thing is not just in terms of being on time, but just being here. We've got, after today, I think we've just got 2 more sessions meeting in person. And we're going to finish the Odyssey today. It's certainly abbreviated. I would have liked to spend a lot more time just reading and talking about it, but we got to move on. And we're going to cover Othello. And one question from the final exam is going to deal with Zenia in the Odyssey. And the basics of the question, which I should have the exam posted sometime tomorrow. It'll take a while to get all the materials for it up. But the exam itself will be posted. And Zenia, what is it? And then providing an example where you explain the scene and the situation and how it fits into the basic principles of Zenia, right? Pretty simple question that allows you to sink your teeth into it without a lot of parts. Because I think everybody, are we all agreed that like you felt the questions on the midterm had too many parts? That was kind of the vibe I got. And I personally don't disagree myself. And I'm always trying to judge how to go about doing it. But so a little more simplified. Then the second question is going to deal with Othello. And it's going to be connected with certain passages from the text and most likely dealing with the character of Iago. The play is called Othello. The main character appears to be Othello, but really this character Iago, who again is quite fascinating, interesting, and also diabolical. He's a kind of Machiavel. He's very sinister, but also very interesting. He really dominates the play in a lot of ways, and he is the kind of mastermind of everything that happens in the play. And the question is going to deal with things about his nature and what he's up to and so on and so forth. And really being present for class is going to be really essential, especially dealing with Shakespeare's language. And we'll spend some time dissecting key passages. We won't really be able to focus on the play in its totality because of 2 classes. I mean, we will establish the plot and talk about it and can have an open-ended discussion on it. But then we're really going to focus on passages where Iago really takes center stage and gives us some insights into his world and his thinking. One thing, and I will post this tomorrow, one thing that I'm going to ask you to do for Othello, apart from read the text, and I'd like you to just read the entire play by next week. It's not that long. The language is challenging. You're not going to get everything the first time. Guess what? Don't worry about it. Doesn't matter. But what I'd like you to do, and I'll send out the link for this, is to watch a film version through Amazon. Film, it was made, I think in 1996 with Lawrence Fishburne and Kenneth Branagh and some other well-known actors. Many of you probably know Lawrence Fishburne for stuff. He's still in movies and some TV. He was in that show Blackish? Very good actor. He's been around for a long time. He was Morpheus in The Matrix, right? You know, he had the red pill and the blue pill. Anyway, one of the best ways to approach Shakespeare, even for someone who's very literate and well-read, is to actually see an actual production first, so you can see that language being spoken in the context, the situation, the theatrical situation, to get a better understanding of what's being said. And one thing that I strongly recommend, and I do myself, especially if I'm watching a play cold and I'm not that familiar with, is I turn on the closed captions and I have a combination of hearing what they're saying, but also seeing it combined with the circumstances in which they're saying it to start to get the quickest grasp on the play. This is a really good version of the play. It's a good film. It's a very good and faithful adaptation of Othello. It doesn't have any kind of weird gobbledygook interpretive. It's pretty faithful rendition. It's edited down. It's not the entire play, but you'll get a strong sense of what this play is about, and you'll also get a strong sense of what the characters are like. It is really just I mean, obviously we all know that Shakespeare is a playwright. The words he writes are intended to be performed on stage by actors, right? And that can't be lost when you try to just read, because you just cannot get the feel of the words or the meaning until you see it performed, in which you get the feel and the delivery of the words, and you start to get the meaning from that delivery, especially when you're dealing with Shakespeare's language, which is, of course, a great challenge. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of England during World War II, he famously said, the United States and England are two nations divided by a common language, right? And it was a little bit of a joke. Of course, we all speak English in the United States and England, and yet, despite the fact that we speak the same language, we in some ways we kind of don't, right? And different words mean different things, and it can be kind of confusing. Well, Shakespeare's the same way. We in the present and Shakespeare are two time periods divided by a common language. It's still English, but Shakespearean English is its own world in terms of its grammatical structure and in terms of the use of specific words, right? Some words you're going to encounter that are just utterly foreign to you. We don't use those words anymore in modern day English. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is that he uses words that we still use regularly today, but they are used in a different way and have a slightly different or maybe very different meaning, right? It's another thing to be sensitive to. The reason I asked you to buy the specific edition of Othello that I've asked you to purchase is because it has really great footnotes that explain the language. They basically tell you what specific words mean, words that you might never be able to figure out on your own, or maybe even not even opening up a dictionary, because he's using them in very specific ways with specific connotations. Okay, so the Odyssey. I want to look at three sections of the text today. I want to look very briefly at this interaction between Odysseus and the people in Alkinoos's palace, right? So this is the palace that Odysseus is on before he finally gets permission from the gods. This is where he's ended up after he's left Ogygia, and he washes up on the shores of the island of the Phaeacians. It's called Scheria. And there's a palace there, a people. They worship a specific god, a specific Olympian god, which is really interesting. And there's a king and a queen, Alkinoos and Arete, or Arete. Her name literally means virtue or excellence. And this is a depiction of this kind of perfect kingdom with a good king and a good queen who treat their guest in a rather exceptional way, but there's an interesting little catch there. And the scene I want to look at is this exchange between Odysseus and Arete, where she asks him a series of questions as a stranger. And the Greek word for stranger or foreigner is, or you could use the word alien, like we use the expression illegal alien. The Greek word for stranger is xenos, Xenos. And that is where we get this term Zenia, which is guest-host relationship or friendship. It's friendship with strangers, right? And one of the central dimensions of Zenia as this ritual of manners between guest and host, or guest-host hospitality, is that it involves an encounter with a stranger who's come from some far-off land, someplace other than your own. And we'll see that the very concept of a stranger has many different kind of facets to it that are relevant in different circumstances, right? So Odysseus is a stranger on this island because he's a foreigner. He's not of that place. Although it turns out he has many things in common with them, despite being a foreigner. And one of the big issues in the Odyssey is, why are there these people who are out and about away from their homeland, right? The world of the Odyssey is a world that's very insular. It is the exception rather than the rule to be far away from your home, to be traveling around the world. There's only certain people who would be doing such a thing, and they'd have specific reasons for doing it. And many of the reasons turn out not to be so good. So every time you encounter a stranger in this world, they're a big question mark, and it's not necessarily a positive thing that they are a stranger. The other thing is that Odysseus has a motive to conceal his own identity while he is on the island of the Phaeacians, the Scheria, with Alcinous and Arete. Anybody know why that is? Why is Odysseus not comfortable in divulging his identity while he's in Alcinous's palace? Anyone figure that out?
Was it because he didn't trust them? He didn't want to be betrayed?
Yeah, but it's even more specific than that.
Like he didn't want them to attack him and kill him.
Well, that's a good question, because in other islands that certainly would have happened. Absolutely. Would that have happened on this island? I'm not so sure. Well, what would have been the cause of the conflict if they knew who he was? It's something pretty specific.
Is it because he gave himself away to Cyclops at the end, to Polly, whatever his name is?
That has something to do with it. Absolutely. Is Odysseus there for good reasons? I mean, this comes back. Remember the opening lines of the poem. But one man alone, everyone else who is alive has returned to their homeland from Troy, but one man alone has not. And that's Odysseus. And that's not a positive thing necessarily, that he's been out to sea so long and hasn't returned home. He's still alive. The people who have died, they've got a good excuse for not having made it home. Has he done anything wrong to incur not getting home as a kind of a punishment? Who is he being punished by that helps prevent him from getting home? Connected with revealing himself to Polyphemus the Cyclops.
Poseidon?
Yeah, Poseidon's been after him. So we talked about some of the backstory that really isn't actually in the Odyssey itself, but the traditional story is that when they came from Troy, they had done horrific things. They had desecrated an altar to Athena and destroyed a sacred statue of her, and that Zeus and Athena themselves were punishing Odysseus and his men. Over time, it becomes Poseidon, because Odysseus reveals the fact that he's the one, I'm the one who's harmed Polyphemus by puncturing his eyes so he can't see, after, pretending he was nobody and so on. And then Poseidon, who's Poseidon? The father of Polyphemus, right? And an Olympian god. And we are made aware in book 1, right? When Athena and Zeus are on Mount Olympus, and they're able to make a decision about releasing Odysseus from Poseidon's punishment, precisely because only because he's away. So let's come back to it very quickly. Why does Odysseus not want to reveal his identity on the island? And think about this as a guest, he's doing something somewhat improper or rude and potentially threatening by not acknowledging who he is to these people. Their question would naturally be, if he's not acknowledging who he is, well, maybe that's because he's a threat to us. Any thoughts about why he doesn't acknowledge who he is or doesn't want to? Because of course he does eventually. Who do the Phaeacians worship? Who is their civic deity? The god that looks over their kingdom and island.
Poseidon.
Yes, it's Poseidon. And Poseidon is not happy with Odysseus. And Poseidon is not going to be happy with the Phaeacians for helping out his enemy, which is an interesting bind therein, because Alkinoos and his wife, I mean, this whole depiction inside his palace is of a righteous king, a good king, right? We've seen the suitors, their nobility who want to become king in Ithaca. They are noble in the sense of by birth, but they're not noble in the sense of their character, right? Here is a man, a good king, who is both noble by birth, but also noble in terms of his character. And obviously he's got an obligation on one hand to treat his guest well, to, you know, fulfill this code of conduct, Zenia, right? On the other hand, they worship Poseidon, and Poseidon actually punishes them when Odysseus finally leaves, and he bars up their harbor so that strangers can't come to Scheria again. Okay, so we'll look at that. Then we'll turn to the island of Polyphemus and this interaction between Odysseus and his men and Polyphemus, and why Zenia fails on the island of Polyphemus. What goes wrong? Why is it not fulfilled? Why does Polyphemus have no interest in fulfilling Zenia? Why does he think it's irrelevant to him? An important question. And also, you can see how when Polyphemus behaves badly, I mean, if Zenia is a process of reciprocal exchange, of tit for tat, of this for that, right? Quid pro quo, right? On the island of Scheria, one good deed is returned with another good deed. On the island of Polyphemus, one bad deed is returned with another bad deed. One lie is reciprocated with another lie, right? So it's almost like the inverse of the situation that Odysseus encounters on the island of Scheria. And then we're going to jump to the conclusion of the text when we look at Odysseus in the contest for Penelope. What's the contest all about? We made it to the end of the text. What is that contest the suitors have that Penelope sets up to finally determine which suitor is going to take her hand?
It's a bow and arrow contest.
Yeah, and specifically, what do they have to do? Because the details here matter.
It's like they have to get what is it called? Like the target or something. It's like with the axis.
And before that, yeah, we can explain, because that's a little, yeah, it's a target practice. They have to shoot the arrow through like the holes in the handles of the target of the axes that are all lined up. If you see it visualized, it's a little easier.
But they have to actually get the string up to even get to
the string up on
throwing
what?
The arrow. I don't know what it's called, like the actual.
What goes with an arrow?
Yeah, what is it called? It's like a string. It's the.
They have to string his bow.
The bow.
Yeah.
Bow.
He's got to string his bow, right? Very good. And whose bow is it?
Odysseus.
Yes, it's really crucial that that bow was given to Odysseus many, many, many years ago, right? Because what do we know about that bow? Who is the only person able to string that bow, really?
Odysseus.
Yeah, I mean, it's strongly implied, but it's not spelled out in the text. But I think it's pretty clear that only Odysseus can string that bow. And there's an important conclusion that the reader, I mean, we have dramatic irony. We have the ability to see, we know it's Odysseus doing it. He's disguised as a beggar because this was his sneaky kind of like CIA tactic for getting back in his household undetected and like taking the temperature of the room and figuring out how to handle all these suitors because they have numbers are against them and they have to compensate for that. So he can't use force against them. He has to use fraud. He has to, which is just another way of saying deception, right? So we know that it's Odysseus stringing the bow and shooting the arrow. Are the suitors aware that he's the one who strung the bow and shot the arrow and hit the target?
No.
They don't know it's him yet. And what's really stunning is how long it takes them to recognize that it's Odysseus who's done this. And from our point of view, the reader's point of view, it really is obvious. It not just is him, but it must be him. The only man who can string the bow. And particularly once he's won the contest, what's the first thing he does? With the bow and arrow now in hand, he now has a weapon. First of all, they didn't even think he's going to string the bow. Second of all, they certainly didn't think he's going to shoot the arrow through the target. Third of all, they certainly didn't realize it was him now with a weapon in his hand. What does he do once he wins the contest?
He kills one of the suitors, like the main one, or the
yes, that's really important. He kills not only a suitor, but the suitor that has been like the head representative of this whole body of like dozens of suitors. Antinous. His name literally means without mind, right? And to that extent, someone without mind, without reason, you could say. He's not stupid. He's a smart guy. He's cunning, but he's reckless. Right? He's overconfident. And he's also the one that transgresses the most. So it's very interesting that he's the one who gets killed first. And he's kind of the most obnoxious of the suitors. And there's this kind of poetic justice where the reader is like, yes, he's the first one I'd want to go to. When he kills Antinous, he puts an arrow through his neck and the blood, it's like a Quentin Tarantino movie. The blood is like squirting all over the place. And then he falls down on a table with food and the food like falls all over him as he falls onto the floor and wine pours all over. It's very graphic and it's quite amazing. And this is one aspect of Homer. He has this penchant for empirical detail, description of physical phenomena, something that you really see totally lacking in the Bible. The Bible only tells you exactly what you need to know in order to understand the story. It does not describe like you're looking at a painting or a scene, and Homer does that often. Do the suitors, are they aware what's happening when Odysseus shoots Antinous with the arrow through the neck? Do they understand that it's Odysseus at that moment?
Oh yeah. After that, I think they got the memo.
Okay, I'm asking a fairly specific question out of hundreds of pages, right? Not quite yet. Not quite yet. So when we look at that scene where he strings the bow and shoots the arrow, we want to ask one of the more interesting questions. Like the question at the beginning of the book has always been not, is Odysseus going to make it to Ithaca? The story at the outset foreshadows that he will make it home. The question is he going to make it home, quote, too late, as Tiresias says in the underworld. He says, even if you make it home, it's going to be too late. And that seems to too late what does too late seem to imply? If Odysseus makes it home too late?
I think too late would be if Penelope was married.
Because it's not really explained, right? It just says you're going to make it home too late. And you're asking yourself, like, what is Odysseus supposed to make it home by bedtime or something? Like, does he have a curfew? Like, okay. So Delavan, I think, is absolutely correct that too late means like by the time he gets back to the island, it's like a fait accompli of what's going to happen. And Penelope, simply, Penelope's married and there's nothing he can do about the situation anymore. And perhaps even legally, based on the traditions and the codes of Ithaca, if she had married another man and he had been gone for that amount of time, and the marriage would have been justified, and he may not have had any standing other than to try to fight in a situation like that. So the question's never been, is he going to make it home? The question's always been, what's going to happen when he gets there? And we finally find out, but the suitors, for some reason, are just completely unable psychologically to come to the recognition that the man standing before them is Odysseus. And the reader is, you're kind of like pulling your hair out. You're like, come on, it's obviously Odysseus, but they don't recognize it until more people get killed, that they finally realize who they're dealing with. And of course, he looks like a beggar, even in that moment to them. So there's a disguise, but even despite the disguise he's had on, they should be able to make the inference that the man they're dealing with can't possibly be any ordinary beggar, and that really the only person it could be is Odysseus. And for some reason, they don't want to come to that recognition. And the question of why is a really fascinating one, because it creates one last really dramatic element, especially because Antinous, this guy who you're rooting against, from the beginning of the text, he finally gets his just desserts. And what's I find quite amusing is when he gets killed, he doesn't even realize that he's been killed by his arch nemesis, Odysseus, right? There's something fascinating about that. Okay, so let's rewind a second. And we started talking about Zenia the other week. And I just want to, I didn't cover every last detail of it. So I want to go over some things quickly that we already talked about. And other things I'm going to spend a little more time on, and then we'll move to the text as quickly as I can. So Zenia, you can translate it as guest, host, friendship, or hospitality, right? It signifies a relationship between people, a foreigner, a stranger, and a host who is in their own home. And of course, home has two important meanings here. Home is like, it's a place or it's a structure, like a house or a palace in the case of the Odyssey. But more specifically, home is the place where you belong. It's where your identity resides. Home has a whole set of habits, of customs, of laws, of ways of thinking, of ways of living, ways of being that you've become accustomed to because you grew up in it. And you know what isn't home the moment you leave an environment that has those customs, codes, ways of thinking, and enter a new situation that is foreign, not just because it's a different geographical location, but because the way they live, the way they think, the rules and customs that they live by are noticeably different, and they stand out. Right? So this is, when you have Zenia, you've got a guest and a host. It's like two worlds colliding. And sometimes you discover that those worlds are not that far apart, right? The world of Ithaca and the code of conduct of the Greeks manifest in Odysseus or Telemachus is really no different than the land of the Phaeacians. They have, which is to say, they have the same values. They have the same moral codes, right? They understand, they have the same understanding of how a human being should conduct themselves in light of the fact that they're a civilized human being rather than something else. So what is Zenia? It represents a whole series of conduct and a set of rituals and unwritten rules about how one should carry oneself. And when we look at the story on the island of Polyphemus, we see that explicitly Zeus is, he's described as the protector of strangers. The word stranger is xenoi. It's where you get the word Zenia, right? It's just the plural of the noun. And it says that Zeus avenges those who have been mistreated as guests, right? So he metes out divine justice for those who break the code of Zenia. And it's interesting because Zenia is then, it's a code of divine justice, but it's also obviously a code of human justice and human morals. And the two are kind of, in a sense, seamless. One of the central aspects of Zenia is that it involves exchange. A host gives hospitality in many different forms to a guest, and the guest, therefore, is supposed to reciprocate. To be reciprocal is this for that, quid pro quo. It always has to be a two-way street back and forth of exchange. And the guest is supposed to show some kind of appreciation for the hospitality they're given. This is why it's very obvious to see that the suitors, for example, are terrible guests because they take advantage of their hosts. They abuse their host. They show no respect to the host. They show no appreciation for the host. What kinds of things can be exchanged? Both tangible and intangible things. What do we mean by tangible and intangible? What are we talking about when we're talking about things that are tangible and things that are intangible?
Something material, like things, gifts.
Yeah, tangible things are material things, physical things, objects of some kind. Things you can hold in your hand or stuff in your mouth or drink, right? What are intangible things? It's the opposite of tangible, right?
Things that you can't physically hold, but that they're there.
Yeah, things that are clearly there, things that are clearly significant, but they don't have like a solid physical. You can't hold them in your hand. You can't physically hand it to someone else, but they're clearly very important and can be of great value. So, simple question: what are some of the things you see exchanged as part of the code of conduct called Zenia in the Odyssey? What are things you see exchanged? And let's be clear. Every time Odysseus arrives at a new island, you have a circumstance in which Zenia is played out either in the way it should or its rules are violated, right? And so almost every time there's an interaction in this text, you see an example of Zenia. Whenever you've got a person who is in a strange land interacting with the inhabitants of that land, what kinds of things are exchanged come to mind?
There are some set of manners, respect.
Okay, so intangible. Let's do this. Let's start out with tangible things that are exchanged. What kind of physical things get exchanged in Zenia?
Gold and like treasures and stuff.
Okay, good. Treasures and trophies and kind of Odysseus gets lavished with like these cauldrons and tripods and gold when he finally leaves the island of the Phaeacians, and he brings back this great treasure. Absolutely. What else? Tangible things.
Food and wine.
Absolutely, food and wine. And if you think, obviously today, when you talk about hospitality towards someone coming over your house, you would think of, cup of coffee, food, wine, the basic kinds of things. And these people are in a strange land. They don't have resources accessible of their own. So that's not a surprise at all. Any other tangible things we can think of? Okay. What about intangible things? Anastasia, I think did you say respect?
Yes, respect and some set of manners.
And some set of what?
Manners.
Manners, absolutely, right? Which is just there's a proper code of conduct that comes with being a guest and being a host. And what, well, Ali, absolutely. Respect, mutual recognition, absolutely. What else? Intangible. There's a handful of other very important things that are exchanged that are intangible.
I would say perhaps trust, because they kind of just open the doors to strangers, and then the strangers
Absolutely.
have to...
This whole relationship is predicated on goodwill and trust in someone you really don't know completely, right? So there's a leap of faith involved in this relationship, and it's clear in both Polyphemus's island and on the island of the Phaeacians, right? Because actually it turns out that, like, to be honest, Odysseus is not like the most trustworthy person with the Phaeacians. First of all, he doesn't tell the truth. He doesn't acknowledge who he is at first. They want to know who he is, and he doesn't tell them. And in fact, the reason he doesn't tell them is because he's gotten wind of the fact that they pray to Poseidon, and he doesn't want any more trouble, right? And yes, so trust, and you could say goodwill, which is a kind of openness to trust someone. Absolutely. Other intangibles. Alkinos's palace, what kinds of things do they give to Odysseus that are intangible?
Could music or a song be intangible?
Yeah, sure. It's somewhere in between, right? Stories, right? So he hears the bard tell the story of the Trojan War, and it brings him to tears. Speech, right? Simply talking to one another. And that may seem so obvious as to be banal, right? That guest and host would exchange words, exchange speech. But also the type of speech matters. And one of the most fascinating things on the island of Polyphemus, when Odysseus and his men try to speak to Polyphemus, well, Polyphemus speaks a little bit to them, but he's very rude. He does not treat them as proper guests. And eventually they try to speak to him, and what does he do in response? Instead of speaking back, he does something else.
Oh, he eat some of them.
Absolutely. He responds, he doesn't reciprocate word for word. He reciprocates words with grabbing them and eating some of Odysseus's men, smashing their brains, on the rocks like puppies. It's very vicious. I mean, who would do that to puppies? And then eating them, right? And so instead of providing a meal for Odysseus's men become the meal, right? And you realize just how radically different a circumstance they are in from, say, Alkinos's palace. So speech, one of the most important things that is done is the asking of questions, right? And we'll look at that just a moment. Who are you? What are you doing here? What's your purpose? What land do you come from? Why are you so far away from your home, right? What kind of people in this world are far away from their home? By which I mean the world of the Odyssey. What kind of people are far away from their home?
I think it's like, I guess, soldiers, people who like go and go to war.
Number one, you had all these Greeks go off to Troy to fight. Soldiers, right? A soldier approaching another land is an implicit threat, right? Because the only people those soldiers protect normally are their own people and their own lands. When they're in foreign lands, they're there to pillage. Do Odysseus and his men do any pillaging once they've left Troy? Basically acting like pirates?
Yes.
Absolutely. They're like, well, these are foreigners. We're entitled to just ransack their city. And why? Because my men need stuff, and they can take the booty, right? Booty meaning like the spoils of war, right? That's ancient economics for you. Instead of ruthless capitalism and capitalist competition, you just had military conflict instead, to get what you need. So soldiers who are an implicit threat, what other kind of people would be out on the sea?
Pirates.
Yeah, pirates, another threat. And then you could think of like merchants who travel from one place to the other. Any other people who are not at home, who are either out at sea or away from their home, and it's probably not a good thing. In this world of the Odyssey, I mean, Odysseus is trying to get home. In this world of the Odyssey, people, where do they belong? They belong at home. This is not like an itinerant world. Like, these people don't just move around. They typically stay home. So if they're not at home, there's something unusual going on. Yeah, it could be slaves. And a last one that's suggested throughout the text is that people who are being punished by the gods, being exiled from their home because of something they've done wrong. And if they're wandering out far from their home, that's not a good sign. Think about Cain, right? He's at home in the land east of Eden after they get kicked out of the garden, and he kills his brother, and then he gets exiled by God, and he has to go to, I mean, he starts as his own city, kind of creates a new home, but that doesn't happen in the Odyssey. So people who are exiles, on the run from the long arm of the law, and the long arm of the law in this world is the divine justice of the gods up on Mount Olympus. So it's rarely a good thing when you're away from home, and it's only natural that the people you encounter are going to be skeptical of you. Okay, just a couple more points here. So Zenia comes from the word xenos. It literally means stranger. And the first thing, I mean, stranger has so many interesting connotations. A stranger simply can be someone of an unknown quantity, which is, who is this person? Where do they come from? What are their moral codes of conduct? What are they all about? Why are they here? Stranger also has that implication of being unusual or different, right? Because someone from another place has a different way of living, a different way of thinking, a different code of conduct. So they can be strange, right? Strangers are strange. A foreigner or an alien, which is to say a person of a different tribe or nationality. Again, they have different allegiances. They pray to different gods. They have different beliefs. All these things, of course, can bring you into conflict with these people. They're the other, right? An outsider, someone who is not part of your group, right? So here are some examples we just talked about of the types of people who are likely to be strangers in strange lands. So because Zenia deals with foreigners, it's a kind of microcosm of, you might even call it foreign policy, where you're engaged in almost a kind of diplomacy with someone from a far off land, where you have to determine who they are and how similar or how different they are. And the more similar you are, the more likelihood that you're going to have this ritual play out in a positive way. And the more different, the more conflictual the ritual is likely going to be, into where it breaks down, which is what we see on Polyphemus's island. So Zenia is a form of justice, right? In that it represents a set of rules that people are supposed to follow, and if they break them, we'll look at this passage later in a moment. If they break them, the gods will avenge them and will punish them for having broken the rules. And therefore, it's also a form of moral conduct, right? Just representing civilization. What distinguishes the human being from the animal? We don't just have impulses, we have reason to regulate our impulses. And we operate not on physical laws, something we talked about with the Bible. We don't operate just on physical laws. We operate on moral codes of conduct, which are above physical laws. And of course, the problem with moral codes is that moral laws is that they can be broken, unlike the law of gravity. One last really important thing here is that Zenia represents a kind of litmus test, right? To determine the nature of the people engaged in it. It helps to reveal and illustrate who these people are and what kind of person they are. In some cases, we're talking about the distinction between human beings. Is this a human being of good character or bad character? In some cases, we see that Zenia reveals that some people we're dealing with are not human beings at all. And one of the most fascinating things is that when Odysseus leaves Troy, he goes to all these different cities in which he encounters beings that are like human beings, but are not really exactly human beings or have the same codes as they do. And you start to see this array of types of civilizations and types of beings and creatures, some that are like humans, some that are more like beasts. And the way they carry themselves starts to illustrate and reveal who they are, what kind of being or what kind of person they are. So obviously we look at the suitors and we see their bad conduct, and we get an insight into why, while they are nobility, they lack noble characters, right? They're actually base. Okay, so let us turn to Acrobat Reader. Yes, there we go. So this is a passage in which Odysseus is in Alkinous's palace. He's talking to the king and queen, and he has not revealed his identity, right? And we've talked about why now. Could I have a volunteer to read starting from right here where it says Alkinos with an exclamation point? Who can read for us? Anastasia, would you like to read for us?
I am from my phone. I don't really see that very clear.
Delavan, can you read for us? I can make it a little bigger.
Did you call me?
Yes.
I can read for a second.
Sure.
Starting at
Alkinos with the exclamation point, yes.
Alkinos, wary Odysseus countered, cross that thought from your mind. I am nothing like the immortal gods who rule the skies, either in build or breeding. I am just a mortal man. Whom do you know most saddled down with sorrow? They are the ones I'd equal, grief for grief. And I would tell a tale of still more hardship, all I've suffered thanks to the gods' will. But despite my misery, let me finish dinner. My belly's a shameless dog. There's nothing worse. Always insisting, pressing. It never lets us forget. Destroyed as I am, my heart racked with sadness, sick with anguish, still and it keeps demanding. Eat, drink. It blots out all the memory of my pain, commanding, fill me up. But you, at first light of day, hurry, please, to set your unlucky guest on his home soil. How much I have suffered. Oh, just let me see my lands, my serving men, and the grand high roofed house, then I can die in peace.
Okay, so he wants to be sent home by the Phaeacians. He's asking for that help, but he has not acknowledged who he is. Does that sound like a good guest, given the demand he's making?
No.
No, right? He's in a very awkward position. I mean, obviously he carries himself with dignity as a guest in Alkinos's palace, and he shows respect for them, except for this one thing, and that's his identity. And that's precisely because he's afraid of the consequences of revealing his own identity. And of course, ultimately the Phaeacians get punished for it. Interesting here. You want to keep going, Delvin?
Sure. Just the highlighted part, or just keep going?
All burst into applause. Let's just read right through.
Okay. All burst into applause, urging passage home for their newfound friend. His pleading rang so true. And once they poured libations out and drunk to their heart's content, each one made his way to rest in his own house. But King Odysseus still remained at hall, seated beside the royal Alcinous and Arete, as servants cleared the cups and plates away. The white-armed queen Arete took the lead. She spotted the cape and shirt Odysseus wore. Fine clothes she'd made herself with all her women. So now her words flew brusquely, sharply. Stranger, I will be the first to question you myself. Who are you? Where are you from? Who gave you the clothes you are wearing now? Didn't you say you reached us roving on the sea? What hard labor, queen, the man of craft replied, to tell you the story of my troubles start to finish. The gods on high have given me my share. Still this much I will tell you. Seeing you probe and press me so intently.
Let me pause for just a second.
Sure.
So she now remember, Odysseus has been kind of feted by the Phaeacians. He's been put in like a chair of honor. He's been fed in front of the whole palace and kind of shown off. And they have this day of games just because they're present. They all sense, despite the fact that he's kind of like what the cat dragged in. Remember, he washes up on this island from Ogygia and he's covered in mud and he looks kind of like nobody. And of course, he's naked and there's this kind of interaction with the daughter initially, Nausicaa, right? He's been treated with all this respect. They don't even know who he is by name, but they can tell he's somebody special by the way he's acting. And they're actually concerned to do right by him because they don't want to upset the gods because they think he's this godlike man. But she asks these, why is she asking these questions? I mean, obviously she's asking because she doesn't know who he is. But what's the real motive for asking these questions of why are they so concerned to know who he is? Stranger, right? That's the Greek word xenos, stranger. And the word is translated that way throughout the text. And notice, they didn't ask these questions at the beginning. They only, in propriety and respect, they only asked these questions after they had already treated him as a kind of royal guest, right? Who are you? Where are you from? Who gave you the clothes you're wearing now? Where did the clothes come from? He got them from Nausicaa, the daughter of the queen. Didn't you say you reached us on the roving sea? Like, how did you get here? What's the import of these questions? What does she really want to know? What's the concern for this kingdom in their relationship with this man?
She wants to know why Odysseus is there. Like,
I mean, obviously there's a level of curiosity, but beyond curiosity, why do they need to have answers to these questions?
I think they want to know who they're going to help because they're like getting all this men ready to like to help him, and they need to understand like who is he, like why are they even helping him.
Sure, and you would think you would have a right to know those kinds of things if you're going to give such generosity to somebody, right? Why else do they need to know about who he is?
They don't want to piss off the gods.
Sure. I mean, what is a stranger in this world? Is a stranger a friend or an enemy? It's kind of a trick question, right? Is a stranger a friend or an enemy?
You really don't know until you know who they are.
It's always unknown.
You don't know, but you sure as heck need to find out which one they are. Because if they're an enemy, you've got to deal. You're not going to be serving them wine and the sacrificial animals anymore. You're going to be treating them as an enemy, right? Just like Odysseus and his men have to be prepared very quickly for the fact that Polyphemus is not going to treat them as feted guests, right? Okay, so these questions, I mean, Arete, the queen, is asking these questions, but these are emblematic of every situation in which we have this unfolding of Zenia, because you need to, and the questions help facilitate figuring out who is before you, because you need to know whether they're a friend and an enemy. And if they're a stranger, you don't know until they're no longer a stranger. And you need to figure that out for self-preservation. Okay. And so, of course, here he tells the truth of certain facts. So he doesn't lie, because as you've all noticed, you should have noticed by now, Odysseus likes to lie. He likes to make things up. When he encounters his wife on Ithaca, he lies to her about his own identity after not seeing her for 20 years. I mean, oh my God, that's amazing. So he doesn't lie, but he omits a lot of crucial facts that help to continue to conceal his identity at this stage. Because of course, it's not till the end of book 8 into the book 9 where he acknowledges who he is. Okay. So let's go forward. Oh, it's already here. Where are we here? Oh. Let's do this. $8.53. Let me go back one more page. Okay, let's pick up right here from the bottom. So this is book 9. This is their encounter with Polyphemus. And before we actually get to the interaction with Polyphemus, we get this description of his island. And it's not obvious why his island is being described in such great detail, but it ends up being really important in understanding who they're dealing with and what kind of creature they're dealing with and how they should expect him to respond in Zenia, which helps explain why Polyphemus does what he does rather than treat them properly as a host. Could I have another volunteer read for us, please? Angelica, can you read for us?
Yeah.
From the bottom here, from there we sailed on.
Okay. Could you make it just a tiny bit bigger? Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you. From there we sailed on, our spirits now at a low ebb, and reached the land of the high and mighty Cyclops. Lawless brutes who trust so to the everlasting gods, they never plant with their own hands or plow the soil. Unsown, unplowed, the earth teems with all they need, wheat, barley, and vines, swelled by the rains of Tues, to yield a big, full-bodied wine from cluster grapes. They have no meeting place for council, no laws either. No, up on the mountain peaks, they live in arcing caverns, each a law to himself, ruling his wives and children, not a care in the world for any neighbor.
Okay, so we get this pretty vivid description about these key points of what this world of Polyphemus's island is like. And the question is, why are we getting it? And what is the significance of these observations? Because these observations are then going to play out in how Zenia does or does not work on this island. Okay. He says they never plant with their own hands or plow the soil. Unsown, unplowed, the earth teems with all they need, wheat, barley, and vines, swelled by the rains of Zeus to yield a big, full-bodied wine from clustered grapes. First of all, what is this island like? What does it remind you of? Maybe even. It's obviously not a desert island.
It's kind of like the where Adam and Eve were. Like it says they don't have to touch the soil. Like everything
Absolutely.
gets done for them.
So, I mean, this is a motif coming out of ancient myth and literature, right? In Greece, it's Arcadia, and in the biblical tradition, it's Eden. What's the key attribute of Eden? What makes it a paradise?
Everything is provided and nothing needs to be done.
Be fruitful and multiply. The earth here is teeming, right? Like everything is fecund, it grows of its own, and you don't have to do what?
To work.
Yes, so that's the focus in the biblical story, because then they have to work afterward. But what's the specific work that you have to do to get to grow things in the real world as opposed to Eden?
You have to like tilt the ground or the soil.
Yeah, you till. Remember, there was no man to till the soil. What kind of person tills the soil? Notice, unsown, unplowed. What kind of person tills the soil?
A farmer.
Yes, there's no farming on this island. Why? Because the creatures that live here and their society do not have farming. To sow is to plant seeds, right? To plow is to plow the fields to be able to plant, and then you grow. What's the significance here? Historically, starting with the agricultural revolution, there is a direct connection between the development of farming and agriculture, taking control of nature and controlling to produce food, and civilization itself. When you look into the history of human society, the first cities actually come out of the agricultural revolution. We think of farm country being totally distinct from urban, and obviously it's different now as it was then. But the point is, historically, the two went hand in hand, because providing for food meant that you were sedentary, you stayed in one place by farming, and it also meant you produced a bounty, you had a surplus of resources that provided wealth to be able to feed a large urban population that could become very economically, politically, religiously sophisticated, culturally sophisticated. So therefore, farming goes hand in hand with the concept of civilization itself, right? The kind of development of human life. Think about the myth of Prometheus. You have these kind of poor people who are on hard times, and then they're given fire, they're given all the technology, and then what do they build? They build cities, and cities are a symbol of civilization. The root word for civilization comes from the word city. Well, what are the Cyclopes, the Polyphemus and his Cyclopses, what do they not have? They don't have civilization. They don't have an urban world. They don't have architecture. They live in caves. They don't have politics and a public life. They all just keep to themselves and don't care about their neighbors. They don't have a place for counsel. What's one of the first things we see in the Odyssey depicted? We see Telemachus calling the council, the assembly, to deal with a public political matter, which has to do with his father's absence and its consequences on the politics of Ithaca, right? So the lack of a council signifies the lack of politics, because the council or the assembly is the place where everybody comes together to deal, to confer and deliberate about problems that affect them all. And here they all live a law unto themselves, right? They lack civilization. And how are they described? It sums up this lack. They're at the top left, lawless brutes. Lawless brutes. We saw this word brute in Milton. He says, I of brute human and you of human God, something like that. What is a brute? What is a brute?
Someone who's violent.
It connotes someone who would likely be aggressive or violent, but it's not the specific what the word literally means. Obviously, the word brute has a connotation of primitive, lacking civilization, like the Geico caveman kind of Neanderthal mentality. That's totally consistent with this lack of civilization being depicted, right? And then, but what does the word brute literally mean?
Like an animal.
Yes, a brute is an animal, full stop, right? The beings who are on this island are closer to animals than they are to humans with speech and civilization. Obviously, Polyphemus is a funny character. I mean, he's a descendant of a god, and he's got this strange mixture. On one hand, he has godlike powers. He's like really big and strong. On another hand, he can speak. That brutes don't speak. Animals don't speak normally, you know, unless you're a serpent in the Bible. And then on the other hand, he's this very primitive character, right? So obviously lawless and brute goes together because animals don't have laws. They don't live by codes of moral conduct. They live by the law of nature, right? What is the law of nature in this context? Or maybe I should say more specifically, the law of the jungle, we call it. What is the law of the jungle?
Survival.
Yeah, and what's the expression? The law of the jungle.
The strongest survives.
Yes, and let's just, the strongest survive, or might makes right. Might makes right. That's the law of the jungle. And that's a law kind of physics, because the stronger physical force overpowers the weaker physical force. Think about what law is and morality is. It gives the force of law to people who are weak, right? The people who are strong don't need the law to help them out and protect them because they're strong, right? It's just like free speech. You don't need free speech to protect opinions that everybody agrees with because everybody agrees with them. What you need free speech laws for is to protect that speech that most people don't like, right? And you protect it against the force of their desire to suppress it, right? So lawless brute, it's really almost redundant. The brutes don't have laws. He doesn't have civilization. Now, ask yourself, just from this paragraph, Is Zenia going to go well or poorly on this island?
Poorly.
Poorly.
Obviously.
Yeah, and the reason is obvious. For Zenia is a human code of conduct. Zenia is a manifestation of civilization, of manners, of respect, all these things that the law of the jungle doesn't care about, and beings that act in accord with it. Angelica, yes.
So this is the part I was like confused, and also like when at the beginning they were like the gods were talking, saying that like humans bring things upon themselves. It reminded me of that because technically he wasn't home, right? So wasn't it rude for them to just kind of go into the house and start like taking the cheese and all this other stuff without like acknowledging the fact that the owner wasn't there? Like, and then he kind of just came in, and I feel like that's why he was probably so upset, because they kind of assume like, okay, I can take your stuff and you can be cool about it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's some funny things about this story. They go in to take his food, and Odysseus stays there purely out of curiosity, right? They don't knock. They don't wait. They don't wait for the owner to come back home. On the other hand, you know, the notion that under any circumstance Polyphemus would have recognized the rules seems pretty unlikely. It seems pretty obvious that there's nothing they could do. There's no amount of good conduct they could exhibit that would get him to follow the rules, because he precisely acknowledges that he believes he doesn't have to follow the rules. So one of the big questions, I mean, Zenia fails on the island of Polyphemus because he doesn't believe, that Polyphemus doesn't believe he has to follow the rules. And then the question is why, right? Why don't we pick up right here? When young dawn with her rosy fingers shone once more, we all turned intrigued to tour the island. Angelica, do you think you could keep going?
Yeah, just the highlighted stuff or everything?
The whole passage.
Okay. When young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, we all turned out, intrigued to tour the island. The local nymphs, the daughters of Zeus himself, flushed mountain goats so the crews could make their meal. Quickly we fetched our curved bows and hunting spears from the ships, and splitting up into 3 bands, we started shooting. And soon enough, some gods had sent us bags of game to warm our hearts. A dozen vessels sailed in my command, and to each crew 9 goats were chartered out, and mine alone took 10. Then all day long, till the sun went down, we sat and feasted well on sides of meat and rounds of heady wine. The good red stock in our vessel's hold had not run out. There was still plenty left. The men had carried off a generous store in jars when we stormed and sacked the Cyclones' holy city. Now we started across at the Cyclops shore, so near we could even see their smoke, hear their voices, their bleating sheep and goats. And then, when the sun had set and night came on, we lay down and slept at the water's shelving edge. When young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, I called a muster briskly, commanding all the hens, "The rest of you stay here, my friends in arms. I'll go across with my own ship and crew and probe the natives living over there. What are they? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men?"
Okay, so there's a couple interesting things here. They've just gotten all the bounty they need. Obviously, they need food. So you could say that they're justified. If they're starving, there's a certain justification they have in taking stuff from other people. Of course, they get in trouble with the cattle of the sun on Helios's island, right? Interesting conflict there. But they have all they need to get by. And Odysseus doesn't want to leave the island yet. Why? Because he wants to find out the answers to these questions. What are they? Not who are they, what are they, right? He realizes he's not dealing with humans. Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men. Obviously, we know the answer. Now notice before that it already said lawless brute, but you have to remember that this is Odysseus telling the story to Alkinoos and the palace, right? So he has the kind of omniscient knowledge of the narrator where he already foreshadows what's going to happen later. But now he's kind of in the real moment of the story with how they reacted. We already know the answer to this question. Which one is it?
They're not like friendly, or they're going to follow the rules.
Absolutely not. And should Odysseus and his men already have an idea about what the answer to this question is? Even though they haven't met the Cyclops in person. That's the whole catch here. He wants to see this thing in the flesh. And they haven't seen any of them. They've just seen the island.
Yeah, I think this was like very, like, it just didn't make sense for like an intelligent person to stay there. So it just seems kind of like idiotic. I just didn't understand it. Like, I feel like this was his one fault. Like, curiosity killed the cat here.
Absolutely.
Not
so
like,
this exhibits one of his motives on his journey is not simply to get back home. He is curious. He wants, I mean, what is this journey about? To boldly go where no man has gone before. I mean, he encounters something new and novel and unusual, and he wants to learn about it, even if it's detrimental to him, right? So he's a little foolish here, and foolish for a very interesting reason.
Yeah, and like, even if they were nice, like, what was the point? Like, I didn't understand. Like, even if they were nice, like, how was that gonna, like, that's the part I didn't get.
Oh, well, that's the point. That's the point of our intellect. Our curiosity is not necessarily something practical, right? I mean, we want to know about things that maybe we'd best just leave alone. And our curiosity, as you said, curiosity can kill the cat. So he should already know the answer to this, but he's really concerned to have the specifics of the real nature of this being. Because I mean, let's put it this way, he can't help himself. In the same way at the end, where he wants recognition, I was the one who did this to you, Polyphemus, Odysseus, raider of cities, right? Raider of cities. What's another name for a raider of city? That sounds like a pirate to me on land, right? So Odysseus and his men are not angels. Right? This is very interesting. They're presented as being heroic and superior to the average human being, but they're not without certain interesting flaws. So we know the answer, and he should know, but he's too curious. Let me see exactly where. Let's pick up right here. Our party quickly made its way to his cave.
Okay. Our party quickly made its way to his cave, but we failed to find our host himself inside. He was off in his pasture, ranging his sleek flocks. So we explored his den, gazing wide-eyed at it all. The large flat racks loaded with drying cheeses, the folds crowded with young lambs and kids, split into 3 groups. Here the springborn, here mid-yearlings, here the fresh sucklings off to the side. Each sort was penned apart.
So
all of his vessels.
So just one question quickly. Polyphemus is not a farmer, but he's a what? It's not like he has no civilization whatsoever. It's just minimal. And he lives very close to nature, we could say. What is his occupation? He's not a farmer, but he's a what? He has all these animals he takes care of, right?
Yeah. There's a name for, I forgot the name of it. It's not a farmer. It's like a
shepherd.
Yeah, he's a shepherd. Absolutely. And he loves his animals very much, as we find out.
Yeah, he doesn't eat them. He like eats people.
Isn't that interesting? He has them as pets.
And all of his vessels, pails and hammer buckets he used for milking were brimming full with whey. From the start, my comrades pressed me, pleading hard, Let's make away with the cheeses and come back. Hurry, drive the lambs and kids from the pens to our swift ship. Put out to the sea at once. But I would not give way. And how much better it would have been. Not till I saw the gifts he gave, but he proved no lovely sight to my companions.
Okay, yeah.
There we built a.
Let's just pause for a second. So Odysseus's men are inferior to Odysseus. He's wiser than them. He's more accomplished than them. He's the leader. He's essentially their general, or in this case on the ship, a captain, right? But there are certainly moments where his men exhibit superior wisdom to Odysseus. And here they naturally want his comrades pleading hard, say, let's take the food and get going. They know what matters. Food for their stomachs and their lives. And Odysseus is willing to risk everybody's life for his own curiosity. And all kind of interesting things here, like what kind of guy does that? It's rather arrogant. He's not being a very good leader here because he's losing sight of what should be the priority. But his men get it because their concerns are simple, right? Yeah, keep going, Angelica.
There we built a fire, set our hands on the cheeses, offer some to the gods, and ate the bulk ourselves and settled down inside, awaiting his return. And back he came from pasture late in the day, herding his flocks home and lodging a huge load of good dry logs to fuel his fire at supper. He flung them down in the cave, a jolting crash. We scolded in panic into the deepest dark recesses. And next he drove his sleek flocks into the open vault. All hid milk at least, but he left the males outside. Rams and billy goats out in the high wall yard. Then to close his door, he hoisted overhead a tremendous massive slab. No 22 wagons, rugged and four-wheeled, could bulge that boulder off the ground.
So they're trapped inside his cave now, right? That's the problem.
Such an immense stone the monster wedged to block his cave. Then down he squatted to milk his sheep and bleating goats, each in order, and put a suckling underneath each dam. And half of the fresh white milk he curdled quickly, set it aside in wicker racks to press for cheese. The other half let stand in pails and buckets, ready at hand to wash his supper down.
So Polyphemus is what? He doesn't just have one eye. What else do we know about him? In terms of his physical makeup.
He's like huge.
He's massive. Huge and he's what?
Strong.
Yeah, he's strong. He moves this boulder that the ordinary men can't move. And one of the great elements of the description that Homer gives here is the differential in the scale between Polyphemus and these little men who are like little snacky treats for this giant, right? And he treats them like, I don't know, like Cheetos he's popping in his mouth or something. They become totally insignificant. And this gives us an insight into why he doesn't care about Zenia, because he's physically powerful. Might makes right. There's only one problem. Is physical strength the only form of power?
No.
No, definitely not. And that's a big problem. And because Polyphemus is physically powerful, the only type of power he seems to recognize is physical force. And he doesn't seem to be aware that there are other kinds that might overcome his own attributes. What other kinds of power are there? What is power? It's just the ability to accomplish a task, right? You don't need to be big and strong to accomplish every task. What does Odysseus have that's going to allow him to compensate for Polyphemus's power, given that they're not as strong as him?
He's very clever. So he even says,
yes,
like, I'm nobody. So that's
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Absolutely. So it's brains versus brawn, right? And Polyphemus doesn't really consider that he could be outsmarted in this way. He's kind of cunning, but he's not the sharpest tool in the tool shed either. All right, you want to keep going?
Okay. And half of the fresh white milk he curdled quickly, set it aside in wicker racks to press for cheese. The other half let stand in pails and buckets, ready at hand to wash his supper down. As soon as he briskly finished all his chores, he lit his fire and spied us in the blaze. And strangers, he thundered out, now who are you? Did you sail from over the running sea lanes, out on the trading spree, or roving the waves like pirates, sea wolves raiding at will, who risk their lives to plunder other men?
Okay, let's pause right there. So this, remember what we just looked from Arete. She asked these questions, stranger, who are you? Where do you come from? You know, what gods do you pray to? Now, she only asked those questions after Odysseus had already been treated to a fancy meal and a fancy time in the palace. She has discretion. You don't come out and ask personal questions of someone up front. You normally wait until you've established the proper rapport, and it's a sign of respect. Polyphemus, you know there's a problem here because he disregards all that sense of respect, of waiting for the appropriate moment. And then the questions he asks, you realize, are very confrontational. They are not friendly. He's already taken a very kind of a conflictual position or disposition with them, or stance, right? And what does he ask them? First of all, the first thing he says to them is strangers, not the most accommodating thing. Who are you? Where did you sail from? Okay, that's kind of like Arete. Over the running sea lanes, out on the trading spree, or roving the waves like pirates, sea wolves raiding at will, who risk their lives to plunder other men. What does it mean to plunder? What does it mean to plunder? What's a synonym, a simple synonym for plunder?
It's steal.
Yeah, steal. That's what pirates do. They steal shit because that's what they like to do. Because they get stuff, you know, by taking it. What's funny about this description? He said, he basically says, are you guys a bunch of pirates out to rob me?
I mean, they kind of were, like they robbed him.
Yeah, not kind of were. They really did act on their way from Troy. They really acted like pirates in certain places. When Odysseus says, I'm the one who poked your eye, he says, I, Odysseus, raider of cities. I mean, think of like the Los Angeles Raiders, right? Right? A raider of city is basically a pirate on land instead of at sea, right? So they really, his description, his very combative question is actually very apt. All right, let's keep, wait, you know, we're not going to get to the end, but for the test, this is really crucial right here. Can you keep going, Angelica, for us?
Yeah. The hearts inside us shook, terrified by his rumbling voice and monstrous hulk. Nevertheless, I found the nerve to answer firmly. Men of Achaea, we are.
Let's just pause. Odysseus wanted to know so badly. He saw all the trappings of this island and the trappings of the Cyclops, but he didn't see the actual creature. And so what did he want? He wanted to know what the actual creature was like. And now he's got a mouthful of what the creature is actually like. And they're terrified, right? And why are they terrified? Because they can feel palpably the disadvantage they're at, trapped in this cave with a being that's much bigger and stronger than them, right? They can sense their self-preservation is kicking in here. All right, go for it.
Men of Achaea we are, and bound now from Troy, driven far off course by the warring winds over the vast gulf of the sea, battling home on a strange tack, a route that's off the maps. And now, so we've come to you. So it must please King Zeus, plotting hard. We're glad to say we're men of Atreus Agamemnon, whose frame is the proudest thing on earth.
Fame. That's important.
So great a city he sacked, such multitudes he killed. But since we've chanced on you, we're at your knees in hopes of a warm welcome, even a guest gift.
Okay, let's pause here for a second. He says, we've just a couple more minutes and we're done. We're men of, he says, who the heck are you, you little humans? I'm ready to eat you up. And Odysseus responds, we are men of Achaia. That means the Greeks, basically. The Achaeans fought at Troy, and that's how they're described in the Iliad and the Odyssey. He said, we are the Greeks that fought at Troy. We've been driven far off course, right? But we fought alongside Agamemnon, one of the greatest warlords and leaders in the war. And, you know, he sacked cities and multitudes. He killed many people. What is he really saying here? We are the great here. I mean, who are the people who fought at Troy? The people who fought at Troy are the great, noble, and heroic Greeks who fought. So what is Odysseus saying? We are the great warriors who fought at Troy. You should honor us as guests and recognize who we are. And of course, if he were talking to another Greek, the other Greeks would go, oh my God, it's Odysseus and his men. They're so awesome. We love them. But he's not dealing with another human, or he's not dealing with a Greek. And Agamemnon, or excuse me, Polyphemus couldn't care less that these are heroes who came from Troy. They're not worthy of any respect. Then he says, we're at your knees. He shifts gears here, and he's giving justification for why they should be treated well as guests, right? The first is, we're men who fought at Troy. We're great heroes, and you should recognize that and give us our props, right? Then he says, we're at your knees. Does anyone know what he's talking about when he says we're at your knees? We go just 2 more minutes, we'll be done. Okay, so when Odysseus encountered Nausicaa, the daughter of Alcinous, he contemplated whether he should come up to her on his knees and grab her by her legs. And what is this? It's a gesture of supplication. What does it mean to be a supplicant? It basically means to be a beggar. We're begging at your knees to give us something. What does he want? A guest gift. Well, what do you give a guest? You give them a gift. That's part of Zenia. He's explicitly asking for Zenia and its codes to be respected, and for them to be respected as these heroes. Okay, you want to keep going, Angelica?
Yeah. The sort of that host gives strangers. That's the custom. Respect the gods, my friend. We're suppliants at your mercy. Zeus of the strangers guard all guests and suppliants. Strangers are sacred. Zeus will avenge their rights.
Good. So Zeus of the strangers is literally Zeus, the aspect of Zeus that looks over this ritual of Zenia and metes out divine justice. Question: what is the gift Odysseus and his men are going to get from Polyphemus? Because they're not going to get a cauldron made of gold. What is the gift, quote unquote, they're going to receive?
Oh, he's going to eat them.
Yes, absolutely. That's their gift. So what are Odysseus and how are Odysseus and his men going to have to pay back that gift?
Well, Odysseus pretty much like slashes his eye out.
Yeah, exactly. They take this long tree trunk and sharpen it and stick it in his eye. That's their gift. That's their return for the favor. Let's just read just a little bit more here.
Yeah, so stranger, he grumbled back from his brutal heart. You must be a fool, stranger, or come from nowhere, telling me to fear the gods or avoid their wrath. We Cyclops never blink at Zeus and Zeus' shield of storm and thunder, or any other blessed god. We've got more force by far. I'd never spare you in fear of Zeus' hatred. You are your comrades here, unless I had the urge. But tell me, where did you moor your sturdy ship when you arrived? Up the coast or close in? I'd just like to know.
Okay, so this is hilarious. Polyphemus asks this question at the end. He says, by the way, humans, where's your ship? Notice he doesn't recognize anything about them being heroes at Troy. And he gives an explanation as precisely as to why he doesn't have to follow the rules of Zenia. Why does he think he doesn't have to follow the rules of Zenia?
Because of his father.
Yeah, it's two connected things. He says, I am the son of Poseidon. I am a powerful being. I'm entitled. I'm not obliged to follow the rules of Zeus. Are you kidding me? And then the other, of course, is he's got the force. He's got the power, right? You can't make someone abide by a moral code when there's a massive disequilibrium of power. Just like in military conflict, you're never going to have a truce while one side has the upper hand. They're just going to, it's like Russia, Ukraine. They're going to force the other side to capitulate, right? The only way you can have like real negotiations where both sides can get something out of it is on a plane of equality. And there's a disequilibrium here of power. Question, why does he want to know where Odysseus' ship is? Why do you think he wants to know?
He probably wants to like destroy it or see if there's more people so he can eat those people.
Yeah, I think probably both. He wants more dessert. He wants dessert for the ones he's going to eat here. And I'll just read it here. So, and then it says, so he laid his trap, but he never caught me. See, Odysseus foresees why this question is being asked. Odysseus is a sneaky, cunning guy too. And Polyphemus is asking why. He says, I just like to know. No, Polyphemus wouldn't just like to know. He wants to know to get the other men and eat them. So he laid his trap, but he never caught me. No, wise to the world. He's been around the block. I shot back in my crafty way. So Polyphemus has now lied to his guest about why he wants to know where the ship is. And the request is not an innocent one. It's not how you treat a guest. So how does Odysseus respond? He responds with a lie. He says, my ship? What are you talking about? Poseidon, god of the earthquake, smashed my ship. He drove it against the rocks at your island's far cape, dashed it against a cliff as the winds rode us in, and I and the men you see escaped a sudden death. So he says, guess what? There's no ship and there are no other men but the ones you see right here, which is a complete lie. And then notice how Polyphemus responds. He does not respond with speech the way a human in conversation would. He responds by taking them and eating them, right? So let me just a second read just a little bit of this passage. Not a word in reply to that. The ruthless brute, the animal. And so he's a mixture of an animal and a god. It's a very strange combination. Lurching up, he lunged out with his hands toward my men, snatching two at once, wrapping them on the ground. He knocked them dead like pups. Their brains gushed out all over, soaked the floor, and ripping them limb from limb to fix his meal, he bolted them down like a mountain lion, left no scrap, devoured entrails, flesh and bones, marrow and all. Like they're all in horror right now, the ones that are alive. And Odysseus is thinking, wow, this is what I get for my curiosity. We flung our arms to Zeus. Why did they do that? They're begging for divine justice. They want help. And there's no help to be found right now. Okay, so we shall leave it at that. And I will give you the information for Othello, the film version, tomorrow morning. And with that, have a wonderful night. And if anybody needs to chat with me, we can chat. But thank you for hanging on there.
I have a general question.
Yes.
Do you mark points down for lateness based on how many days we're late, or if we're late like 1 point, no matter how many days we're late, or if we're like an hour late, or
that certainly has an element in it. I don't have like an absolute rubric. Like if you're late 3 times, your grade automatically gets lowered by so much. I mean, when I look at attendance, I mean, if we're talking about a complete absence, that's a different story. I do have fixed numbers in the syllabus for that.
Oh, sorry.
But,
I mean, like for their responses, like for the.
Oh. No, well, if it's late, you will see that I will write in the comment late.
Okay.
I have tended to give everybody time for the rest of the week to get their responses in before I start grading them.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Thanks. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, Professor.
Good night, Felicia. Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
I have a question, kind of comment.
Go for it. Yes.
On tonight's reading response or discussion board, I accidentally hit submit, but it was blank. And then I put my answers in, like I replied to my submission where I didn't put the answers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I did it on time. I just
Okay.
submitted a blank thing first, and then
it happens. No, I mean,
Okay.
I'll look at it and I'll be able to figure out what I'm looking at. No big deal.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
Hey,